he's going to be far more about, things could get worse. So let's play a game of waiting. Line 119 and following. I should be much for open war, O peers, hear the language of Parliament. This literally sounds like a bunch of senators or congressmen, or in the case, of course, of Milton, a bunch of parliamentary spokespeople sitting around having conversations. Milton, by the way, obviously had that experience, right? We mentioned that in an earlier lecture. O peers, as not behind in hate, if what was urged main reason to persuade immediate war did not dissuade me most, and seemed to cast ominous conjecture on the whole success. In other words, things could be a lot worse for us. As a matter of fact, at line 181, he even says it. He says, we could each be caught in a fiery tempest, be hurled each on his rock, transfixed. Here, Milton making his observation that it's like Prometheus, who is, gave fire to humans, and for that, jacked on a rock where his liver is eaten out every day, and he screams the F word to God. We've talked about Prometheus and the Promethean kind of person. Let's just pause for a moment at 3 and make the observation. Milton, 200 years later in the 1800s, is going to be very influential for the Romantic poets. Remember, we've already made some observations in other lectures about Percy Bysshe Shelley, Prometheus, Unbound, the significance for Milton of Byron, of Blake, of Keats, all very important Romantic poets for us. And Milton is here referencing this notion of the Promethean. Of course, what is the other name for the Mary Shelley's novel Frankenstein? The modern Prometheus, right? At line 196, Bellel will continue, better these than worse be my advice, since fate inevitable subdues us in omnipotent decree, the victor's will, to suffer as to do, our strength is equal, nor the law unjust that so ordains. In other words, he says, in some ways we got what we deserved, and now what we deserve is to just kind of chill here. Come on, there's, note the pun of chilling, right? There's nothing to worry about. We'll just basically kind of take our lumps and go with it. And then he continues and he even says it, maybe God will forget. At roughly line 220 or so, he says, this horror will grow mild. This darkness light. It's a middle road kind of view, right? Besides, what hope the never-ending flight of future days may bring, what chance, what change worth waiting, since our present lot appears for happy though but ill, for ill not worse, if we procure not to ourselves more woe. In other words, he says it this way, let's just sit and wait, and we'll figure this out. It's all going to be fine. It's all going to be fine. This horror, he says it, will grow mild. Well, that's the second speech. The third speech is Mammon. Of course, Mammon, we're told, he's the god and the angel in heaven. He never could look up and see God's beauty because he was so busy looking down at the gold of the streets. And Mammon is usually, of course, referenced as the god of greed, the lover of stuff. And at line 228 and following, we're going to hear him say, hey, here's what we should do. We don't need to go to war like what Moloch was saying. And we definitely don't need to just sit around and do nothing like Belial, that lazy, slothful demon. Rather, let's go to work here. Let's create a new political order here, right now. We can thrive under evil. At line 228 and following, he says, either to dethrone the King of Heaven we war, if war be best, or to regain our own right lost. Him to unthrone we then may hope when everlasting fate shall yield to fickle chance and chaos judge the strife. We're going to hear more about chaos here in a little bit. The argument will then be simply, let's just kind of wait and see how things appear. He continues by saying, suppose we should relent and publish grace to all on promise made of new subjugation. With what eyes could we stand in his presence humble and receive strict laws imposed to celebrate his throne with warbled hymns and to his Godhead sing forced hallelujahs while he lordly sits, our envied sovereign, and his altar breathes ambrosial odors and ambrosial flowers, our servile offerings. In other words, he says, we could try to apologize and somehow go back to God, but really we can't do it because it's forced hallelujahs, one student of mine was saying out loud. Well, that's what I felt like when they made me go to church, and I really didn't want to be there. And then I pointed out, well, look who's making the observation. It's, of course, Mammon, a demon, evil in hell in Milton's Paradise Lost. But notice the continuation. This must be our task in heaven, this our delight, if we go back. How wearisome eternity, so spent in worship paid, to whom we hate. Let us not then pursue by force impossible, by leave obtained unacceptable, though in heaven our state of splendid vassalage, but rather seek our own good from ourselves, and from our own live to ourselves. Again, we're back to this narcissism of aloneness, right? Though in this vast recess, free and to none accountable, preferring hard liberty before the easy yoke of servile pomp. This yoke, of course, immediately reminds us of, again, Milton's poem on his blindness. They serve him who also wait. And this notion of the yoke is easy. Here, again, the argument is, let's just play it easy. Let's stay here. Let's not go to war. But let's go ahead and create a world for ourselves. There's applause. It appears as if all of the demons are pleased that this is where we're headed. But we have the fourth speech, Beelzebub. Now it is obvious when you study the poem closely that Beelzebub has already been told by Satan how this whole thing is going to go down. In other words, let's put it in your notes. This is not really a debate. It is actually a contrivance. It's all facade. Satan wants all of these different voices to be heard, so ultimately Beelzebub can say what Beelzebub is going to say. And starting at line 310, Beelzebub will begin to speak. And he says it this way: I have a plan. Thrones and imperial powers, offspring of heaven, ethereal virtues, or these titles now must we renounce, and changing Kyle be called princes of hell. In other words, he says, we once used to have real titles, now princes of hell is about the best we can hope for. Is that all we're going to do, is sit around and enjoy that? For so the popular vote inclines, here to continue and build up here a growing in power, doubtless, while we dream, and know not that the King of heaven hath doomed this place our dungeon, not our safe retreat beyond his potent arm, to live exempt from heaven's high jurisdiction, in new league banded against his throne, but to remain in strictest bondage, though thus far removed under the inevitable curb, reserved his captive multitude. In other words, it appears as if we have something going on down here. But Beelzebub says, don't be idiots. This is a dungeon. Hell is hell. For he, be sure, God, in height or depth, still first and last will reign sole king, and of his kingdom lose no part by our revolt, but over hell extend his empire, and with iron scepter rule us here, as with his golden those in heaven. What, sit we then projecting peace and war? In other words, the argument is, we got to do something. This argument to just sit down here and do nothing, no. We got to fight. But we got to do it intelligently. So, how will one do it? Well, we'll see right away at line 344 the plan. He says, what if we find some easier enterprise? There's a place, if ancient prophetic fame in heaven or not, another world, the happy seat of some new race called man, about this time to be created, like to us, though less in power and excellence, but favored more of him who rules above. So is his will pronounced among the gods, and by an oath that shook heaven's whole circumference confirmed. Thither let us bend all our thoughts to learn what creatures there inhabit, of what mold or substance, how endued, and what their power, and where their weakness, how attempted best, by force or subtlety. Though heaven be shut, and heaven's high arbiter sit secure in his own strength, this place may lie exposed, the utmost border of his kingdom left to their defense who hold it. Here, perhaps, some advantageous act may be achieved by sudden onset, either with hell fire to waste his whole creation, or possess all as our own, and drive as we are driven the puny habitants. Or, if not drive, seduce them to our party, that their God may prove their foe, and with repenting hand abolish his own works. Imagine being a human reader, reading Beelzebub say, the key to ruining God's plan is to subdue, to deceive, to ruin, to finally make it so that the very creation, man and woman, will say to God, no. That would be quite a feat. Imagine, of course, reading that. He finishes that passage by saying, ultimately, God might actually repent that he ever made humans in the first place, and we immediately, if we're biblical readers, know Genesis 6:6, God repented, of course, himself. Wow. Fascinating. He says it, why would we sit down here hatching vain empires? What a great line. He says, what's the point of that? That we're down here hatching vain empires. There's no point in it. But the obvious question, and by the way, the demon angels like this idea. Yeah, good idea. But, of course, line 402, this is all the setup, right? Whom shall we send to search for this new world? Whom shall we find sufficient? Who shall tempt with wandering feet the dark, unbottomed, infinite abyss? This idea that hell is like a maze and it's very hard to kind of figure things out. And this word maze is going to be central to our reading of Paradise Lost. We even think of the word amazing. Hear the play, right? Wandering feet, infinite abyss, and through the palpable obscure find out his uncouth way or spread his airy flight, upborne with indefinable wings over the vast, abrupt, ere he arrive the happy isle. What strength, what art can then suffice, or what in vision bear him safe through the strict centuries and stations thick of angels watching round? And then a few lines later, Satan, he says, whoever goes, and of course we understand it's already the setup, it will be Satan. Satan will be our last hope. Wow. Finally, at lines 430 and following, Satan is ready to speak. Because obviously, the demon's like, yeah, great idea, but who's going to go? Of course, this is the setup. Satan, I'll be the man. I will be the demon. I will be the God hero. I will be the one that does it. And he speaks it this way. Oh, line 430, oh, progeny of heaven, imperial thrones, with reason have deep silence and demure ceaseless, though undismayed. And then some of the best lines of the second book. Look at them. Long is the way, and hard that out of hell leads up to light. Our prison strong. This huge convex of fire, outrageous to devour, immures us round, ninefold. Thinking, of course, of Pilgrim's Progress, a text we'll talk about later. Dante's Inferno, and of course the Divine Comedy collectively, already talked about. Again, look at the line. Long is the way, and hard that out of hell leads up to light. We're going to point out that in this poem, and in Dante, as we've already said, and in other texts as well, you get this sense that there's basically two versions of the notion of hell. One is you go there, you go to hell. The other is you go through hell, right? And, of course, here, long is the way. Finally, at line 466, he will say it. I'll go alone, right? He says, I'll do it. I will make the sacrifice. Now, of course, let's say two things here for your notes. We can ask, is this heroism or is this just egoism? In other words, all along Satan has had this plan, and this is what he's going to do. He's going to make himself a hero by going all by myself. Notice we're back to this word alone again. It just is a mantra. It's all like resonates all the way through the poem Paradise Lost. Secondly, let's point out, and we'll have more to say about this, that in book 3, we're going to move from hell to heaven. And guess what? We're going to have a conversation there between God the Father and Christ the Son. And guess what? There, we're going to have Christ the Son, who will, sounding very much like Satan in book 2, say, I will volunteer to save humankind because they are going to disobey and they are going to fall, and some kind of payment must be made. I will volunteer. So we're going to see this interesting paralleling that happens. All right. So that's part 1 of book 2. Let's go to part 2 now. Now, this is really the heart of the book, and of course it's the journey up and out. And after the council, the devils are lost in thought. This is kind of funny stuff. I wish I had time to read it with you. 552 to 565. They kind of don't know what to do with themselves once it's all kind of said and done. And so what do? Well, starting at 552, he says, but the harmony, their song was partial. All they can do is just kind of sit around and, wander around and have little enclaves of conversation and play little, useless sport games and that kind of thing. It almost seems as if it's a commentary on popular, and we would even argue postmodern culture, on modern culture, that, what is it T.S. Eliot says in Four Quartets, distracted from distractions by distractions, and that's what these demons are all doing. Their song was partial, but the harmony, what could it less when spirits immortal sing, suspended hell, and took with ravishment the thronging audience, and discourse more sweet, for eloquence the soul, song charms the sense, others apart set on a hill retired, in thoughts more elevative and reasoned high of providence. In other words, they sat around in enclaves and they kind of talked about what? Providence, foreknowledge, will and fate, fixed fate, free will, foreknowledge, absolute, and found no inn in wandering mazes lost. In other words, they were like university departments of academics sitting around having useless debates and discussions. I want to point out, because I think this is an injunction even to us as students to say, hey, just because we're reading this stuff, if it doesn't in some way speak to us, it's kind of a waste of our time. It's an exercise in futility. But if it challenges us, maybe to begin to kind of think a little bit, to reason, then I think we've done something important. He continues, of good and evil much they argued then, of happiness and final misery, passion and apathy and glory and shame, vain wisdom all, and false philosophy. Let's just pause for a moment and point out that what Milton, the great scholar, is saying is the same thing that Bacon said in his classic Essay of Studies, that if learning doesn't actually pay off in some way, lead you to live a better life, then what's the point of all of it? Earlier we saw this in Penn's Fruits of Solitude as well, in an observation. What's the point of all the reading and all the study if in the end it doesn't lead you to live a better life, a more courageous life, a more honest life, dare we say it, a more kind life? To continue now into the second part of Book 2, we have an amazing description of hell. I don't have time to get into it, but I will just point out at line 595 that as Satan begins to leave hell and go up, he will meet from fire, we go to cold. And Milton says about the cold performs the effect of fire. For those of us that live out here in Wyoming in this nasty, oftentimes winter experience, we know all about what that's like. Let's also remind ourselves that in Dante, remember, you have fire but in some parts of his hell, but in other parts of his inferno, of course, in the deeper parts, just ice, right? Well, okay, let's get to it. Line 629 now, Satan at the gates of hell. Meanwhile, the adversary of God and man, Satan, with thoughts inflamed of highest design, puts on swift wings, we're back to the wings again, and toward the gates of hell, and toward the gates of hell, explores his solitary flight. Again, solitary, alone, right? Sometimes he scours the right-hand coast, sometimes the left, now shaves with level wing the deep, then soars up to the fiery conclave towering high. In other words, you can see him kind of flying as he's headed up. At last, he says, we're told, at last, at line 643, appear hellhounds, high-reaching to the horrid roof, and thrice threefold the gates. 3 folds were brass, 3 iron, 3 of antimine rock. So you got the 9 gates of hell. Impenetrable, impaled with circling fire, yet unconsumed. Before the gates, now, we are to the heart of the second book. And we are to one of the most disturbing images that we will see. In Genesis 3, we of course have the story of the fall of Adam and Eve. And of course, that story involves a snake and a woman. Milton will play a disturbing game that is allegorical in nature, much like Spencer and Fairy Queen, where you're going to meet these bizarre creatures and not know yet that they represent or symbolize first sin and then death, or first death and then sin, if you want to think of it that way. But let's go ahead and look at it now together. I'm reading, continuing after 650 or so. Before the gates, There sat on either side a formidable shape. The one seemed a woman to the waist, and fair. And we immediately, with the word seem and fair, think about our play Hamlet, don't we? Remember when Hamlet's mom says, "You seem upset." "Seem, madam? Nay, seems it is. I have that within which passeth show these but the trappings and the suits of woe." And you'll remember Hamlet asks Ophelia, the other woman in his life, along with his mother, "Are you honest? Are you fair? Beautiful?" In other words, she is drop dead gorgeous from the waist up like a mermaid. She is a Victoria's Secret model. Stunning. But ended foul in many a scaly fold. Now, of course, fair and foul, we can't miss that, can we? In Shakespeare's opening lines from Macbeth, "Fair is foul and foul is fair, hover through the fog and filthy air. What appears beautiful is in fact disgusting. A drop-dead gorgeous woman from the waist up, from the waist down, a disgusting snake-like vermin. Scaly fold, voluptuous and vast, a serpent armed with mortal sting. About her middle round, a cry of hellhounds never ceasing barked, with wide Serbian mouths full loud and rung a hideous peal. The hounds of hell are biting at her innards and her middle. Yet when they list would creep if aught disturbed their noise into her womb and kennel there, yet there still barked and howled within unseen, so they crawl in and out of her private areas." Again, this is poetry for adults, and we've said this already. And yet you can still hear the hounds of hell barking and that kind of thing. Some lines further down at line 666, the introduction of death. Much has been made of this, that Milton is reciting these lines blind, and yet he knows exactly where he is. For example, as has often been pointed out as well, in Book 9, when Adam eats from the forbidden fruit, it is at line 999.